So x402 solves this problem where there's absolutely zero uniformity in how payments work across the internet. And so what it is it's a standard way of telling a computer how to pay you. Protocols, if done correctly, are a value creation game, not a value capture game.
The business model of the internet for the last couple of decades has been advertising, because eyeballs can be monetized. Now, if I'm a merchant, or maybe if I'm a publisher and I want to tap into this growing demand of agents, how do I actually do it?
The thing that's been really interesting to me is the people who find x402 the most useful are, and this was super counterintuitive to me, the people who find x402 the most valuable are not the Claude code class, it's the Claude cowork class.
And there's a lot of other elements of payments. We were talking before the show about authorization and identity and trust, and then chargebacks and fraud and escrow. How do all those things fit into it?
Views are personal, not investment advice.
This is Money Code. It's a show where we decode stablecoins and agentic finance. I'm Chuk Okpalugo.
I'm Parekh, and today we're joined by Erik Reppel, Head of Engineering for Coinbase Developer Platform and the creator of x402. Welcome, Erik. You had a really interesting and really cool announcement just recently where x402 is now part of the Linux Foundation. Tons of different really cool organizations, from the Visas to the Adians to Cloudflare. Maybe just walk us through just the decision to do that, and what comes next after that.
Yeah, excited to be here, guys. We started x402 within Coinbase a bit over a year ago now, and kind of the goal was always okay, start it at Coinbase, turn it into a thing, move it into a foundation, and then ultimately have it be governed by the same people who govern the internet. And so this was kind of the natural, phase 2 of 3 of our secret master plan. And yeah, I mean, we got a ton of really amazing headline partners to join. We got a ton of, momentum and press and excitement just because of the quality of people that are kind of backing x402. And so the next steps are really, I have my opinions, but it's up to the foundation. It's now an independently governed body. I'm one seat at the table, but there's many other folks involved now. I think places I personally want to see us go is, I think payments are only one part of what we're going to need to see agentic commerce at scale. And so I think there's opportunities to tackle identity and discovery and reputation and a bunch of other things that you really need if you want, truly autonomous payments to work. And so I'm super excited about it being in the foundation now, super excited to collaborate with all the teams that signed up. And yeah, it's still day one.
Yeah, and it's an incredible roster. You've really got the who's who of the infrastructure of the internet: Google, Cloudflare, AWS, Stripe, Visa, Mastercard, of course, on the payment side as well. But before we get into the foundation a bit, maybe just for our listeners, explain, what does x402 do and what problem is it solving?
Yeah, so x402 solves this problem where there's absolutely zero uniformity in how payments work across the internet. And so what it is it's a standard way of telling a computer how to pay you. And that happens to make it super easy for agents to pay you as well. And so one analogy I like to use with x402 is it's kind of like the little placard at the cash register where it says Amex or Visa or Mastercard or cash only. That's sometimes that's ultimately what x402 is it's a way for someone to say hey, you need to pay me to access this thing, and I accept USDC on Base or Visa or Mastercard or Amex or an ACH or SEPA payment or USDT on Solana or any number of things that can all just sit next to each other. And you now know, okay, they want to get paid in this way. And because it's on x402, I know how to make that payment. I know what step I need to take next after I've chosen which way I want to pay.
Right. And it's important what you just said there. You mentioned a lot of different payment types. Now, obviously, it started with USDC on Base, but now that it's as always was the plan, it's open. And this is an internet scale protocol, not a purely stablecoin or crypto thing. And so maybe it's helpful to explain, okay, how does that actually work? What is the mechanism for, hey, you have to pay me in this way, and then it actually ends up happening?
Yeah, so I think this is actually a thing not a ton of people know, but we actually had reached out to a number of different chains before X402 was public to say like, hey, would you be interested in developing this thing with us super early? So we actually reached out to the Solana Foundation, and Solana was like in progress on an implementation when we announced X402 initially. The reason why X402 is USDC on base is like, I know the EVM out of all the blockchains the best ultimately, and USDC has a like very nice gasless way of transferring USDC built into it. And so it actually wasn't just USDC, it was I'll get a little technical here. X402 has always worked with any token that was EIP 3009 compatible. And so the kind of Circle family of tokens are the largest group of tokens that support that standard, but there was a bunch of others that worked from day zero as well. But to answer your question, the way that it actually works is decoupled from the declaration. And so you can say like, hey, I want to pay with USDC on base. And then given, okay, USDC and base, there's then a mechanism that's prescribed for making that money move that's native to the payment network, right? And so obviously the way that you need to move funds on base is different than the way you move funds on Solana or the way that you move funds on Mastercard. All of these you need to kind of have a like well-defined way to go from here's how I want to pay to here's the action I need to take next in order to do that payment. And so that was one of the key, I think, architectural decisions with X402 is to fully decouple the implementation or the mechanism that payment occurs with from the declaration of how you want to pay.
Yeah, that's interesting because you're taking a lot of different disparate standards and you're now packaging it into one. And so there is like this really interesting coordination question as it relates to payments broadly. Maybe just break down just like what are the different components of X402? There's a concept of facilitator, there's obviously the blockchain, there's an asset like a stablecoin as well, but maybe just break down like what are the different pieces of the X402 protocol, because there's something that live as protocols, but there's things that you could also build like off the protocol also.
Let me pull up an image. This might get like too deep for you, but okay, maybe I can't pull this image up quickly. So there's a number of components. The first thing you see with X402 is like the declaration format. So like the actual how do you communicate how the payment is going to go. So like the data structure that describes all these different facets of a payment that is like understandable by a computer. And then the next level down is kind of the mechanisms that I discussed, which are like, okay, so you've chosen your route of choice. How are funds actually going to move? And that's when you get into like the SDKs. And so one thing I think X402 does quite well is we have a very robust reference SDK. So you don't need to use that SDK to use X402. You can build your own. But if you don't want to build your own, there's a very robust SDK that works with all of the different payment methods. And so you can just import one package and then it knows how to perform all the mechanisms on all the different payment networks. And then for the crypto side, we have this concept of a facilitator, which is a fully optional piece of the stack. The facilitator exists because my thesis is that most companies are not going to want to interact with blockchains directly because they don't want to run hot wallets. They don't want to run like RPC infrastructure. And so you want to give them a way where they can kind of delegate that piece of interacting with stablecoins to someone else very easily. And so if you don't want to touch a blockchain yourself, you want someone else to manage that for you, you can use a facilitator. Facilitator is not in flow of funds. It's basically just acting as a opinionated way of interacting with a blockchain. But it doesn't hold your funds at any point, and they're fully portable. And so Coinbase, of course, has a facilitator, but there's probably like 13 or 14 that exist in the ecosystem that do pretty major volume at this point. And then you have the last bit, and the lowest level is like, what is the currency that you're moving, and what is the rail in which it's moving on? And so that's when you have like USDC, USDT, all the stable coins, and occasionally other tokens or USD itself, fiat. And then is it flowing through Base or Solana or Visa, Mastercard, et cetera, et cetera.
Right, and that last part I think is the super interesting part, where the problem that you're solving is an open way of communicating payments, and not just the payment, but the communication of the payment. And you're saying, hey, you need to pay for this thing. This is all the payments or payment methods that I accept. Okay, now if I choose one, this is actually how it needs to get routed. And so, yes, we start with stablecoins on blockchains because they're very easily programmable and we can make that happen. You mentioned all the SDKs that connect to other payment systems, and Visa and Mastercard are also getting involved. And I'm sure there'll be like tokens for authorization to make that happen as well. And so just to kind of pull back a moment here, because it's an open system, it means that we need to facilitate all the different, or as many of the different payment methods and mechanisms as possible. Hence the Googles, the AWSs being involved, the Mastercards, the Visas being involved, Stripe, and so on. And so maybe let's talk about the foundation. What does it actually mean to create a protocol, an opinionated mechanism of communication and agreeing on what to do, and then kind of birthing it and then giving it to this system, this organization that will then take it to the next level, with all these like super major players who some of them compete, right? What does it mean to put something into a foundation, and what are the kind of things to expect from there?
Yeah, so it's one of these. It's been a really interesting journey. It is extremely non-trivial to both start an open source foundation and to get all the partners to coordinate to get involved. And so I need to give a big shout out to the team within Coinbase who helped me do that. We don't want to tell people how to do payments on their network. Like, the Visa people know the Visa network much better than I do. They should figure out how x402 should work on the Visa network. They should control that mechanism. We think the foundation should govern kind of like the top level, okay, how do you declare a payment? But ultimately, like, we're moving money. It's the like exact inputs might be different. And in fact, a thing most people probably don't realize is that, like, if you choose any PSP, checkout.com or Adyen or Stripe, the integration of any of those PSPs is completely different. And so you can't really you have to like do a bespoke thing per way that you're going to do payments. And that is comes with like friction, because there's no standard way of saying like, here's the payment. Okay, I'm going to go do the payment. You have to like own both sides of each transaction. And that works in a lot of websites where, if you're a Shopify merchant, you control your Shopify storefront and you control your backend which has the Adyen integration. And so you can kind of like get away with it. But with agents, you no longer own your storefront. The agent needs a way of understanding how to perform the payment, because it's not just like a human typing into your credit card form. It's an agent that probably has a tokenized credit card or a stablecoin wallet that's going to need to know like, hey, I already have the funds and the like permission to spend the funds. Now I need to so tell me what to do. And so with the foundation, like, anyone who it's open enrollment, anyone who wants to join is welcome to join. The way that payment works on each network is ultimately going to be driven by that network. Like the Solana Foundation owns how payment x402 works on Solana. Same with Base, same with all the fiat networks. And so what you need is like a Schelling point where everyone can agree like, hey, here's the like top level thing. Of course, fragmentation is bad if you want like a robust positive sum ecosystem. And so let's all agree on like the top level thing and create like a common standard for what a payment looks like. And then now agents can integrate one thing and consumer choice can dictate like how payments actually are performed. And there's kind of an analogy I like to make is you don't need to download a browser for every website you go to. That's kind of where we've been at with payments, and that Chrome works everywhere. Safari works everywhere. Chrome doesn't just work with Google properties. You can go to apple.com on Chrome, no problem. And so everyone kind of agrees on like, here's how we show data and here's how we send data. But we've never come to consensus on like, here's how we declare a payment.
Yeah, and I think as a part of that, I mean, what you're describing is a really difficult task of getting a lot of major organizations to buy into a standard. And maybe like, I'm curious, like, there's a ton of different internet protocols today. There's HTTP, there's, like right now, Markdown files are having a moment as an example as well, but it's been around for 20 plus years at this point, right? Maybe just describe like, you have this input of being part of the Linux Foundation now, but what is the next step in actually driving adoption of a protocol? And is it to your point of folks just owning and like taking X402, making it its own, or is there more that needs to get done to really drive adoption for it?
I think right now the piece that's been missing with agentic commerce is because there's fragmentation. It's like not really sure. It's not really obvious. Like, how do you get started, like building an agent that can buy stuff? And so, like, the first step is to make it so there's a bunch of stuff to buy, and to make it so that there's like a clear thing to integrate to, such that your agent can buy stuff. And so, there's payments are a two-sided market, of course, and so there's like kind of three main actors, and we tried to represent this pretty well within the X402 ecosystem. Is like there's supply, there's demand, and then there's payment networks, or the way that money moves would be the other way to put it. And so on the supply side, you have companies like AWS and Cloudflare that serve probably half the internet's traffic. Now, if they go and that's a lot of supply that they can activate. And you have people like Shopify who are also a huge slice of the existing e-commerce market. And you have Google, which is probably another 30% of the internet. And then you have like payment networks that are all kind of coming together and being like, okay, we know that this is going to be a thing. We all want to be a part of it. Let's like agree to like the terms of how we're going to compete functionally. And that, it's unlikely that any one player takes off. Like the payments landscape is super fragmented as it is. And so but we understand that with agents, we need a common standard. We can't get away with being on both sides of every transaction. Otherwise, we're just not going to be able to address the total market. And so let's solve that problem of there's a common standard that's on both sides of every transaction. The standard has no fees. It's totally neutral. It's like HTML. It's hopefully super uncontroversial to use. And then now the demand side has like a clear thing to target as they build out all these agents and these kind of future tools that we all think are going to exist in a couple of years that lead to like trillions of dollars of transaction volume.
Yeah, I'm glad you broke it down that way. It makes a lot of sense. A two-sided marketplace, there's a chicken and the egg problem. Hard to solve, but you need to get the biggest parts of the supply side. You need to get the payment networks involved. You need to get the demand side involved. And so, you've put the foundation together. The foundation of making this happen is actually now in place. But let's talk about now how adoption happens. And so the business model of the internet for the last couple of decades has been advertising, because eyeballs can be monetized. Now, if I'm a merchant, or maybe if I'm a publisher and I want to like tap into this growing demand of agents, how do I actually do it? Is there a switch that I can flip, and all of a sudden my site is served by Cloudflare and I'm getting paid? Do I need to just wait for my merchant acquirer to turn things on? How is the adoption expected to happen, or how do you see it happening in your eyes?
Yeah, I like to think of agentic commerce as two categories. One, which is conversational commerce, and then the second is autonomous commerce. And so conversational commerce is like, hey, I need a new pair of running shoes, and I'm looking to I want to like get into jogging. I'm like pretty bad at running and I have flat feet. You go find me some good shoes. And my agent like goes and does a bunch of research on my behalf and figures out what are the like probably the best shoes for me, and then at some point I like click buy of like the various options it gave me. The thing that's like, if you think about like how do you do that as a human? Like I probably go and read the Wirecutter, and I probably go read like some running magazine website when I search like best running shoes, flat feet 2026. All those are like places that have the opportunity to advertise to me and have like affiliate links and convert that attention that you're talking about, that become eliminated if the agent is now the thing doing research instead of the human. And so this is where like if you're those properties, you probably want to be compensated for the attention that you're missing. And so if you're the Wirecutter, like the agent's still going to go read the wire cutter. And so like, how are you going to get the money? Like every sophisticated publisher has a internal cost per impression that they can calculate, where it's like every time someone clicks the page, it's worth to us 1/10 of a cent, whatever it is. Like if you were smart, you would just say like, okay, I'm going to go and try to figure out like if an agent's coming to me, I'm going to charge them 1/10 of a cent. If a human's coming to me, I'm just going to do my normal course of action. And you can totally do that with x402. And so in terms of like, how do you practically act on that right now? Increasingly, we're seeing, big companies offer kind of like auto x402 infrastructure. But the easiest way right now is to just integrate it into your stack. And so we try to make it super easy to add x402 to most common programming languages and web frameworks. And so I think we support about 8 or 9 different common web frameworks and that allows you to start accepting x402 payments in under 2 lines of code typically. And then you can now like start, stacking those cents every time an agent comes and reads your content or, you can typically, those sub cent or like small cent sub dollar transactions, I think work best in stablecoins. You can, come to CDP and Coinbase for Business and we'll, make your life a lot easier on those things. But, any wallet, anything that's capable of receiving a stablecoin will totally do as a place to receive those payments.
And is that the use case that you're seeing take off most, where it's a content, a research or data? I guess the APIs fit into that category, or is that a separate category?
I think of them as separate, like content versus APIs. Like content is pure consume, whereas APIs fall into the category of the API is probably going to do work for you. And so it's like, roughly the same, that's kind of like a semantic thing. But I think the place we've had the most success on so far is APIs selling either functionality or data. And then content publishers are like have been a little slower to act. But in terms of like who is using it, the thing that's been really interesting to me is the people who find x402 the most useful are, and this was super counterintuitive to me, the people who find x402 the most valuable are not the Claude code class, it's the Claude cowork class. And so if you're a developer, you're probably pretty used to like going and getting an API key to like get some data. And so you like are, that's like not completely foreign to you as a concept. But if you're, if you're on the like Coinbase recruiting team and you're like, you've never touched an API key, you don't know what an API key is, and you're like, hey, I want to use AI to like automate my candidate research. Like how do you pull data from, how do you even pull like a web search? How do you pull, LinkedIn data? How do you pull any like form of data? Like a programmer just uses an API for various services. You as a person who isn't comfortable with a terminal don't have anything right now. And so what x402 gives you is like, hey, I'm going to pay 10 cents to like perform this task. And it's just going to magically happen versus me like perhaps not even being able to perform that task beforehand.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's so funny you say that, and it's just made a light bulb switch on for me because I'm definitely in the Claude code class, and people who've heard me on other episodes, I have switched from Codex. No, I use both basically, but I was doing some research and like automating all this research and getting looking at all these various different tools. And there's lots of competition out there. They do slightly different things. I want to try them all. I want to test them, and I want to do evals. And so I asked the agent like, okay, go research the research tools and then go start using them. And then it comes back and says, oh, this one is really good for this, but you need an API key. Can you go get one? And it gives me a list of all the different things. And so I go off and start to get the API key. So first of all, that's a very developer thing to know to how to get it, secure it properly. And some of them just would allow me to sign up and get the API key for free and give me free credits. Okay, so obviously I started using those. Some others didn't even give me the option to use their service without me adding in a credit card. And I was like, well, there's no way. I've got like 7 different things to compare against here. That was Perplexity, actually. Like Parallel, Exa, like all these firms were like, oh, sure, use our APIs. Check it out. We're awesome. Perplexity were like, hey, you need to give me your credit card details. And I'm just thinking it would be so much easier if, my agent already just had a budget and just had maybe 10 cents or maybe like $1. and I say, hey, whenever you go out and search this stuff, you've got a budget of 10 cents to try it out. That's the future. And I was thinking when I went through that problem, oh, if only I could get the API key through my agent. But actually, now that you've just said that, there shouldn't even be API keys. There's probably needs to be a different standard altogether for the Claude cowork class, where it's just, hey, you're connected and you're just paying, and hey, now you've got a login. Like, so the entire when the entire world is becoming developers, because Claude Code is enabling anybody to build whatever they need to do, we need to change how we interact with software services so that most people who are not technical can purchase the service on a per use basis. And so there's a lot of different ways to do that aren't properly supported right now.
Yeah, one way to think about this is actually the wallet is a universal API key, where the wallet can like prove your identity. You can like sign a message to like show it's always Chuk. I'm like Chuk. I've come here before. You've seen me before, because you like can provide a signature from the wallet. And if you can provide payment in addition to that with a stablecoin, you now have like you can completely get rid of the concept of API keys, because it's like you're just paying for what you use. And I actually think this is a really good business model for a lot of people. Like, take Exa, for example. Like, Exa integrated x402 last week. And when there's this like weird thing with payments and free tiers for a lot of API services, where there's like sometimes there's a free tier, but then like after a certain point, like the subscription kind of floors at $10 a month, or like maybe $5 a month, but it's a lot. And so if you're Chuk, or you're in the cowork class, you don't need 1 million API requests a month. You need like 80, right?
Yeah,
maybe like 100. And so you're in the free tier firmly. Like, you're going to be in the free tier, if they have a free tier. And so they're just making no money off of you. And they're providing you like valuable services. And a lot of that is because like traditional payments infrastructure just doesn't scale to, hey, I'm going to stack 50 cents of lifetime value from this user. Right. And that's just missed revenue.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is, I mean, I vibe code a bunch of different products all the time. I use like Superbase, and then I use it for like 3 days, and then like a couple weeks later, they tell me like, hey, we're gonna actually wind down your services because you're no longer using it for whatever reason, right? And so, to your point, they provided all this valuable service for free, but I'm actually not pursuing that project anymore. And so in that case, they actually missed a lot of a monetization opportunity. And to your point, if they decrease the friction for that cowork class, no API keys, monetize it with maybe some constrained budget, that would have been a lot more valuable for them, even in the short term, because it creates stickiness. It creates some type of familiarity with the service also, where there might be some repeat use moving forward as well. And so this paradigm shift of like no API keys is like something that I've seen over and over again. And, Eric, I've been to, multiple x402 meetups, and one thing that always like surprises me is that being a crypto guy and for so long, I've actually are starting to interact with non-crypto people, and part of like their affinity towards x402 is actually because there's no API keys. But maybe you could describe, you've been in a lot of these 402 meetups also. Maybe you could describe this like the energy from the non-crypto native audience, like getting excited about x402 as well.
Yeah, it's I think that a lot of people have kind of a negative perception of crypto because of like things that have kind of popped off over the years. And yeah, well, it's like I think that it's like I think that the thing that people miss is like crypto is incredible technology. Like, blockchains have gotten supremely good, and actually you could argue like part of the reason why blockchains have gotten so good is because of like all the crazy stuff that's happened. It's like, why do you need to scale a chain? It's because there's demand for scale of a chain, right? And so now we've kind of found out like, okay, all that stuff made blockchains over the last 5 years 10x, 100x, 1000x in performance. And so now we can use these things for like moving money really, really good, really, really well. And so on most modern blockchains, you can send any amount of stablecoin and it'll cost you like 1/10 of a cent or 100th of a cent in order to make that money move. And that's like unparalleled economics. And it's 24/7 global, fully programmable. These are just not properties that kind of exist otherwise. And so if you're a developer and you're like, hey, I have this API and I'm like getting no money because no one's converting from my free tier to my pro tier. If I just charge like 5 cents per request and there's 200 million people who are like using AI every month and they use my API 5 times a month, like that's like 10 million in revenue. And so you kind of see like a true like, oh, this is like a unique thing that only stable coins and crypto rails enable. And, for agentic commerce, for kind of that conversational commerce, maybe you still want to put it on a credit card. That may change over time, but like right now, you probably want to put it on a credit card. But these kind of like low value transactions, which are so, I think, essential to keep the internet vibrant and interesting as agents kind of take over, really matter. Because as you said, Chuk, like the economic model of the internet for the last forever has been ads. And if ads are no longer an effective way to monetize your stuff, you need an alternative. And I think micropayments just make so much sense, because I think everyone would be super comfortable just being like, hey, agent, here is $10. Like, it's not my entire bank account. It's $10. If I lose it, like, I'm annoyed, but it's not the end of the world. You have my permission to spend up to 50 cents per transaction to just be better at your job. Just do better work for me. 50 cents at a time. Let me know if you need more, and I'll like approve it if I think it's worth the money. And you'll get better AI. You'll get a better business model for these companies that currently rely on ads. And you'll get kind of this everyone's a developer effect, because APIs keys disappear and you can now use power tools at kind of non-power user complexity.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing to think about. Where does the economic value of the internet shift to? Subscriptions play a role. And then if you're a merchant, you or just a service, the idea of acquiring a customer and then having them, it has a value. And so there is this idea of having identity, then having a way to reach them. Maybe it's email, maybe it's a wallet. And I'm willing to give you a free tier because I have your email address and you're subscribed and I have your credit card details. And all those things need to change in some way. And it's exciting to see, but it's also has a lot of opportunities for folks who can figure out, okay, I need to go viral somehow to get the initial people through the door, but can I give them a free tier, but still capture who they are? So maybe that's where the identity comes in. And then charge them an amount per delivery of value that's so small that it's a no-brainer. It's like, hey, if I'm going to charge you like a cent to do a search, then I'm going to pay it. But if I'm doing, tens of searches, hundreds of searches over time, then, it's just a new set of business models. And so very, very exciting.
On that, because I think this is actually an interesting point, is one thing I've observed from my seat as being like the X402 guy is that there's actually what I call the agentic premium right now, where you can actually charge meaningfully more per request on a per request basis than you can on a subscription basis. And so what we've seen is a lot of companies that charge, 1/100th of a cent per request. If you like kind of do the math on their subscription tiers, can charge a cent per request if on a pay-per-use basis, which is like, I think actually great, because now if someone doesn't want to subscribe, you still capture value. And if someone does end up using your product and service a ton, they just go subscribe, and then you're back in the black, right? Like you're back in the same game that we've been playing for the last 30 years. And that's like, that I think is like, it's not a either or in my mind. It's a yes and, where you can do both of these things. It's no problem.
Yeah, and I agree. And there's like it's an economic transaction. It's like, hey, like if you give me your contact detail and I can put you on my mailing list, then you get cheaper service. If you don't want that, and you just want to pay directly for the fee, great. And so, yeah, I agree. And it's we're looking forward to seeing how these models change over time. I want to move on to thinking about where to build. If you are a builder, if you're thinking about looking at all these different protocols and trying to take advantage of these new economic models that we've just mentioned. I think a super interesting thing that, I'm sure you and the teams kind of collaborated on when the news came out, the volume is across multiple chains, and soon it'll be across multiple payment methods. And so Solana is driving like 65% of 2026 volume. Are you seeing different use cases on one chain versus the other? And it's like, oh, they use it for this, fine. We use it for this, great. Visa's going to use it for something else. And that's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah, it's kind of X402 has this interesting property, which it was intentional on my part to make this property true. But I think it was the right choice, but I regret it sometimes, which is it's actually really hard to know all of the x402 volume because there's no like central bus of x402. It's really, really hard to make estimates on like the exact amount of x402 volume and across like all the different chains, or even across like a singular chain. And my reasoning for making it that way was no one knows all the web traffic. Like it should be the same. We shouldn't have like a singular easy number that makes it super easy to understand like all x402 volume. And so I think like these things have been, the early adopters have been like people who have like some affinity for a chain, and that's why you see like tons of activity on Base and Solana, because those people like Base and Solana. But I think over time, like agents don't care. Like it, and you as a merchant, like you should just accept everything. Like there's no reason not to just throw every single payment method that you can think of into your x402 accepts. And so I think we'll see, right? Agents will probably have like funds on multiple places, or the ability to kind of shuffle funds between buckets. And I suspect that's like going to become easier and easier over time. And then they just pick the easiest way for them to pay. Maybe their human really likes Base, and so they fund the agent on Base, and then it says, hey, I have funds on Base, I'll pay you on Base. You as a merchant accept Base, Solana, Visa, Mastercard, etc. And the agent just like does the most rational thing. Actually answer your question, Chuk, which is like, where do you build where do you actually like?
I think you did it. I think as a merchant, you want to get paid. And so tying it to what you said earlier, you mentioned the facilitator. If the facilitator is this entity that sits in between and helps you manage things that are on chain, and you don't want to have to think about Base versus Solana versus Monad versus all the new things that are coming, there's a role for a service provider to play there, where you just say, hey, I just want to get paid. So if my customers are on whatever chain, I don't care. Please, facilitator, make this happen. And Raj, I guess you were going to say something similar.
Well, I mean, 100%. I mean, if I'm an e-commerce website today, like I don't really care, like add a card, add stables, add your agent's going to pay for a grade. As long as I get paid, that's all that matters. And so that's kind of what you're describing here. And maybe, I think one thing that, we've touched on, but maybe giving it more concrete about it. Like when I went to the X402 meetups a while ago, there was like a fun use case around like post to postman, where like this developer, like you send a request with your address, and then it automatically mails you a t-shirt in the mail, and it says, it was basically just like a fun joke on like Postman, which is like a fun API interface. But I guess maybe two questions for you. One, like what is like your favorite funny use case of X402 that you've seen? And then maybe your other just like all-time favorite, if you can pick one, just use case that you see, happening, and you likely to see it grow longer term too.
It's such a hard question. It's like choosing your favorite child. I do really like it's t-shirt.sh, which is like, and the reason I like it is because it's cool that you can just like pay $20 and a t-shirt arrives at your door. But B, like I think so often payments becomes really complicated, and you see all these like 1,000-step flows. And it was the first thing that I've ever seen, which is, you send me a post request with the information about the t-shirt you want and your shipping address, and I will ship you a t-shirt. And that's it. It's just like it's so simple. And I'm like, man, I wish all of commerce was this easy. So that's why I really liked t-shirt.sh as much for the, like, it's just so simple, as well as the, it's cool to just be able to generate a t-shirt. The one I found myself using a lot recently is the Messari integration. And so Messari, which is like a data provider and does like a lot of like venture analysis, made a bunch of their research and a bunch of their data available with X402. And so I've like started just like asking Claude for like summaries of like what's going on in the last week in like the crypto ecosystem. And it gives me like a really robust report where it pulls like Messari's data and like CoinGecko's data, and like gives me like, what's happening in the trading side, what's happening in the M&A side, what's happening in the like, news side. And I get like this nice, report that I just read every week that keeps me up to date. And it costs like 50 cents or something to generate. And that's actually, I think that's my favorite trend in X402 over the last couple months is this cost X with X402, where someone a lot of people have started posting like, oh yeah, I did this like really complicated thing, or my AI did this really complicated thing for me, and it cost 37 cents with X402. Like there was I'm blanking on his name. I think it was Noah from A16Z who posted like this whole X402 analysis like 3 weeks ago, and he's like, kind of like, making kind of like a bear and bull case for X402. And at the end, he was like, I generated the data from this report using Allium, and it cost me 26 cents with X402. And I was like, that's the bull case right there. That's exactly the bull case of X402 is, the AI just could do a thing it wouldn't have been able to do otherwise, and it made your life easier.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much happening in the space right now, and like we're just getting started. And as we're getting close to the end here, like there's obviously going to be, building protocols is something that anyone can do, and obviously we've seen, Stripe and Tempo launch MPP. Like I'm curious to get your point of view, just like how do you see, payment protocols just emerge? Is it X402? Are we going to have many? Are they going to route to each other, right? In some capacity, they actually work in conjunction with each other, but curious how you see like the world of payment protocols evolve from here.
Yeah, I think that I'm repeating a talking point, so you guys will have to forgive me because this is like, I said this in a talk a couple months ago, but protocols, if done correctly, are a value creation game, not a value capture game. Like there should be zero value captured directly directly from X402. But what should happen is like a ton of value should be created that otherwise without it wouldn't be possible to go and build on. And so I think that leads me to believe like ultimately, like as long as it's an open standard that wins, that's truly open and truly creates a level playing field for everybody, actually doesn't really matter that much. Like obviously, for my ego, I want X402 to win because I made it. But I'm more so I want X402 to win because I like truly know that X402 is going to be a neutral playing ground for all these people and all these companies to come together and come to consensus on what the open standards are. Right. Like, and so MPP, like I know the engineers who built it, they're really smart. Everyone thought X402 was going to be like a Coinbase only thing for months. And so they're kind of going through the journey of like, wait and see. Do they just have different technical opinions than X402? In which case that's totally fine. Or is this like a thing where, they have different motivation than X402? But it's kind of a wait and see game right now. Ultimately, my goal is like these things should just converge. Like if there's one open standard, that's like the optimal. And so at some point, let's all just converge on one way of doing payments that's like open and neutral, and move on with it.
I think your point around value creation is really interesting because people often talk about like the TAM for agentic commerce or agentic payments, right? And it's like it doesn't exist today. There's no volume, and the same thing can be said about e-commerce back in the day. And that was like part of why people like passed on Shopify, right? And I think like the reason that e-commerce really grew up, actually Shopify plays a big role for it. They actually reduced the friction for e-commerce to even happen in the first place, which is why you have a lot of these, small businesses that now have checkout websites and checkout, and merchant shops. I kind of think of X402 that same moment where you can argue like there's, whatever protocol ends up happening, but it is a value creation game and you're expanding the TAM significantly. And right now it may feel like there's not a lot of volume or people can, make their case based on whatever data they have, but you're actually like reducing that friction significantly where these organizations will have these pay per use or these micropayment optionality where there'll actually be more revenue accrual for them too. So it's gonna be fascinating to see how it plays out too.
Yeah, you don't just wake up and there's $1 trillion in TAM, right? It's you add a couple $1,000 a day, right? Or I think X402 does like $30,000, $40,000 a day on average. Like you have to like build the stuff. All right. If you're going to have like the $1 trillion opportunity, someone's got to go and like actually build the plumbing to make it work. And so the analogy I make a lot is like Netscape and the World Wide Web and W3C like created this kind of open walled garden or open ecosystem that contrasted the walled garden of AOL. And ultimately, like there was more energy and interesting stuff going on within the World Wide Web. And Google did the super valuable service of indexing and making all that data available and searchable. And then they like just made the web really good. Like Google is like one of the leading contributors to the HTTP standard. and they keep it fully neutral. There's nothing proprietary to Google in there, but their business is better because the web is better. And so that's like the ideal for these things, is like anyone can do the thing. Anyone could have built Google, right? But you need the like HTTP that you can, then go and build Google on and let competition sort everything out.
Yeah. And it's like making the economy better for everybody, making the internet economy better for everybody. And it starts with payments, value transfer. And just on the topic of, open networks versus closed gardens, or just open protocols versus other open protocols. There's a couple of analogies, but, I think VHS and Betamax is always an interesting one where, VHS was just simpler, less complex, fewer features, but the simplicity, I guess in hindsight, we say is the how simple it was is what enabled more and more people to use it for more different use cases. And that's what gave it the critical mass to take off. And so I think with X402, you've kept it deliberately narrow. And there's a lot of other elements of payments. We were talking before the show about authorization and identity and trust, and then chargebacks and fraud and escrow. How do all those things fit into it? Presumably, part of the foundation's role is to kind of encourage folks to build all that stuff on top as it fits to their ecosystem. But do you have a sense for like what needs to come next and how it happens?
Yeah, so X402 has this concept in it called extensions, which are the ability to kind of progressively layer in complexity as you go up the stack. And so if you do need a concept like identity, or you want a concept of like, oh, have I seen this person before? There's actually an extension that does that. And so you as the merchant can say like, hey, you can only like come to me if you have this extension enabled. And so that's kind of like our approach, is like start with the like core of moving money, like make it as simple as possible, and then add on complexity as it's needed. For example, stablecoins are kind of interesting because they invert the fraud model that people are used to. And so with the credit cards, you as a merchant need to be worried about fraudulent customers because they might charge you back and, have like taken the shoes and, taken their money back as well. And then you get dinged like a fine for it. Stablecoins don't have chargebacks, but they have refunds. It's like cash. Like if I walk to the, corner store down the road and like hand them a $5 bill, I can't like just suddenly withdraw that $5 bill. I have to like go back and be like, hey, the thing you bought me is like expired, or the thing I bought from you is expired. And so that kind of like reframes it from, you don't really have any risk of accepting stablecoins as a merchant, but you as a consumer now need to be confident that the thing that you're buying is like from a reputable merchant that isn't going to, sell you like a brick in a box. And so these things are kind of different on each network, and every kind of way of doing payments has its own little, special details. And so you want to like start with something that's unopinionated and kind of at the essentials, and then build up the complexity in the way that it needs to exist for everything. Because if you tried to build chargebacks for immediately into X402, it's like, okay, well, are you doing it for stablecoins or are you doing it for credit cards? The way that needs to work is actually exactly the opposite. And so the answer is like, you take it one step forward at a time and, contextualize your engineering decisions with the problems you're trying to solve.
Yeah. It's like layers of an onion, bit by bit. And, as Raj said earlier, e-commerce started very small and ended up, huge over the course of decades. And so a similar thing will happen here. This has been a great conversation. I'm going to go give my agent just $10 of USDC and just say, okay, go figure some things out and see what it does. Where can folks go to learn more about you and X402 or what you do at Coinbase?
Yeah, so x402.org for all things X402 related. If you want to check out my day job as the head of Engine CDP, cdp.coinbase.com, we build infrastructure for people to build on crypto, payments infrastructure, crypto infrastructure. If you're looking to work with stablecoins, we probably have something for you. And then people can follow me on X. I'm @programmer.
That's an incredible handle. There's got to be another story there, but Raj, where can folks go to find you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn at Raj Parekh, X at rparekh, and monet.xyz.
And for me, it's stablecoinblueprint.com, Chuk Okpalugo on LinkedIn, and Chuk_XYZ on X. Erik, this has been fantastic. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks so much for listening to Money Code. There was so much to take away from today's conversation. I learned a lot, and I hope you did too.
If you enjoyed this episode, do us a favor, share it with someone you know, or give us a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast from. Until next time.